My name is Mike Reynolds. I'm 40, and I've been a long-haul trucker for over 15 years. I've driven all across the country, hauling everything from food to furniture. But there's one delivery I'll never forget. The night I picked up a shipment that still haunts me. It started late one evening in Nevada. I just finished a job when I got a call from my dispatcher about an urgent shipment. The pickup location was a warehouse off a remote highway, miles from the nearest town. The instructions were simple: no stops, no questions. Just get the cargo from point A to point B. I'd done shady jobs before, but this one felt different. When I arrived at the warehouse, it was pitch dark, the only light coming from my truck's headlights. A man in a suit stood outside the building, waiting for me. He didn't say much, just handed me a clipboard and told me to sign. The cargo was already loaded, a massive, sealed trailer that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. The man gave me one last warning: no stops. Drive straight through. I felt uneasy, but I signed the papers and got in my truck. As I drove, I couldn't stop thinking about the trailer. What was so important that I couldn't even stop for a break? I tried to push the thoughts away and focus on the road, but about halfway through the trip, something strange happened. I heard a noise coming from the back of the trailer. At first, it was faint, like something shifting around. I told myself it was just the cargo moving, but then I heard it again. This time, it was more distinct. A tapping sound, like someone lightly knocking on the walls of the trailer. My heart started racing. I'd never heard anything like it before. I checked my mirrors, but the road was empty. No one was behind me. The tapping grew louder, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to stop. I pulled over on the side of the highway, grabbed my flashlight, and walked around to the back of the trailer. When I opened the door, the smell hit me first, metallic, like blood. My flashlight flickered across the walls, and that's when I saw it. Blood smeared everywhere. Thick, red streaks covering the inside of the trailer, like someone had been clawing at it, trying to escape. I froze. What the hell had I just been hauling? Before I could process what I was seeing, headlights appeared in the distance, speeding toward me. A black SUV pulled up, and 3 men in black suits jumped out, guns drawn. One of them pointed his gun at me and shouted, "Close the door and get back in the truck." I raised my hands, my heart pounding in my chest. They weren't messing around. I tried to explain that I'd heard noises, but they didn't care. "Get back in the truck," the man ordered again, his voice cold. I didn't have a choice. I slammed the trailer door shut and climbed back into the driver's seat, my hands shaking. The men got into the SUV and followed close behind as I started driving again. I wanted to pull over, to run, to call the police, but I knew they were watching me. I couldn't escape. After what felt like hours, I finally reached the drop-off point, a secluded, fenced-off facility in the middle of nowhere. Armed guards were stationed at the entrance, and they waved me in. My stomach churned as I pulled up to the loading dock. The men in the SUV got out and approached me again, this time without their guns drawn. One of them handed me a thick envelope of cash. "You did good," he said, his tone eerily calm. "Now leave, and forget this ever happened." I didn't say a word. I just took the money and drove off, my mind racing. What the hell had I just been a part of? As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me, but the road was empty. That night, I barely slept. All I could think about was the blood, the noises, and the men with guns. I knew something horrible had been inside that trailer, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just helped deliver someone, to their death. The next day, I turned on the news, and my worst fears were confirmed. A report came up about a human trafficking ring that had been operating across state lines. People were being kidnapped, smuggled, and sold like cargo. My stomach dropped as I realized the truth. The shipment I had hauled wasn't just goods. It was people. I couldn't bring myself to go to the police. Who would believe me? I had no evidence, no proof. And if those men found out I'd talked, I knew they wouldn't hesitate to come after me. I kept the cash, but no amount of money could ever erase the guilt. I still hear the tapping in my dreams, the desperate cries of whoever, or whatever, was trapped inside that trailer. And no matter how far I drive, I know I'll never escape the nightmare of that night. My name is Frank Henderson, and I'm 48 years old. I've been a trucker for over 2 decades, driving across the country, delivering cargo to places most people wouldn't bother visiting. But there's one night I can't forget, no matter how hard I try. It happened a few years ago, at an old rest stop in the middle of nowhere. I was driving through Nebraska, trying to push through a long haul. My eyes were heavy, and I knew I couldn't keep going. I spotted a sign for a rest stop a few miles ahead, so I decided to pull over. The place was run down, with faded signs and broken lights flickering in the dark. It looked deserted, but I didn't care. I just needed a few hours of sleep. I parked my rig and settled into the cab, locking the doors out of habit. The wind howled outside, and the place was eerily quiet, like the world had forgotten about it. I closed my eyes, trying to get comfortable, but something felt off. There was a strange tension in the air that I couldn't shake. Just as I was drifting off, I heard it, a faint sound, almost like crying. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks on me, but the sound grew louder, and I realized it wasn't just my imagination. It was real, and it was coming from the restrooms. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the truck, my heart pounding in my chest. The place was even creepier outside, dark, cold, and completely abandoned. I walked towards the restroom building, the crying growing clearer with each step. When I got there, I found the door to the women's restroom slightly ajar. Inside, the smell was awful, like something had been rotting for a long time. I shone my light around, and that's when I saw her. A woman, crouched in the corner, her face bruised, her clothes torn and filthy. She looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Please, help me," she whispered, her voice hoarse. I was frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. She told me she'd been abducted by a group of truckers who used this stop as a base. They had beaten her, locked her in here, and left her to die. My blood ran cold. I'd heard stories about things like this happening on the road, but I never thought I'd see it with my own eyes. I knew I had to get her out of there, but just as I reached out to help her, I heard the unmistakable sound of a truck engine pulling up. My stomach dropped. I turned to look out the window and saw a massive rig pulling into the rest stop, followed by a black SUV. A group of men got out, their faces hidden in the shadows. "They're here," the woman whispered, her voice trembling with fear. My mind raced. I couldn't fight them. There were too many of them, and they were armed. I had to get back to my truck, fast. "Stay here," I told her. "I'll come back for you." I ran back to my truck as quietly as I could, praying they hadn't seen me. I jumped into the cab, locked the doors, and started the engine. The men were getting closer, their voices low and menacing. I floored it, speeding out of the rest stop, my heart racing. As I drove away, guilt gnawed at me. I left her behind. I should have done more, should have called the police right away. But all I could think about was getting out of there alive. The next morning, once I was far enough away, I called the police and told them everything. They said they'd check it out, but when they got to the rest stop, they found nothing. No woman, no blood, no sign in the struggle. It was like she had never been there at all. I couldn't believe it. I knew what I'd seen, what I'd heard. But the more I thought about it, the more I started to doubt myself. Maybe the exhaustion had gotten to me. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me after so many sleepless nights on the road. But deep down, I know what I saw. I know that woman was real, and I know those men were up to something terrible. I'll never forget the look in her eyes, the pure terror. And even though I got away, I'll never escape the guilt of leaving her behind. My name is Jason Brooks, 37, and I've been a long-haul trucker for over 15 years. Driving overnight routes always felt peaceful, less traffic, fewer distractions. But that changed last month when everything got dark, literally and figuratively. It started on a familiar route. The night was clear, and I was hauling across the Midwest when I noticed a black sedan in my rearview mirror around midnight. At first, I didn't think much of it. Trucks get tailgated all the time, but this car was different. It stuck with me, mile after mile, never passing or falling back, just lingering behind me. I shrugged it off, thinking the driver was maybe just tired, needing to stay near another vehicle for comfort. But as the hours ticked by, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling building in my gut. I tried speeding up, slowing down, even switching lanes, but the sedan stayed glued to my tail. My nerves began to fray. After 2 hours, I'd had enough. I pulled into a truck stop, hoping to lose the car. I parked, looked around, and nothing. The sedan had vanished into thin air. I laughed it off, chalking it up to exhaustion or maybe just a bad case of nerves. I grabbed a coffee and hit the road again, but the pit of anxiety in my stomach remained. The next night, it happened again. Same route, same black sedan. This time, it was even closer. I could see the outline of the driver behind the headlights, but I couldn't make out any details. I tried to shake it once more, but nothing worked. The car seemed stuck to me like a shadow. I didn't pull over that night. I just kept driving, telling myself it was all in my head, but it didn't feel that way. By the time dawn broke, my mind was fried, and I couldn't tell if I was paranoid or if something was really wrong. On the third night, the tension was unbearable. The sedan appeared again, and I was close to losing it. I had to find out what was going on. I pulled over at a rest area, my heart pounding in my chest. The sedan pulled in behind me, headlights still blinding. I got out of my truck, heart racing, and marched over to the car. The window rolled down slowly, and inside was an older man, maybe in his 50s. He didn't look dangerous, but something was off. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. The man sighed, his eyes weary. "I'm a private investigator," he said. "I've been trying to get in touch with you." Confused, I asked, "Why? What's going on?" He hesitated, his voice dropping to a grim tone. "Your wife, she's dead." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't spoken to my wife in months. We were estranged, but I never imagined something like this. "What do you mean?" "She was murdered," he said flatly. "And I've been hired to find you. The killer is after you now." I stood there stunned. Who's coming after me?" The investigator's eyes darkened. "A trucker. Someone who's been following the same routes as you. He's been tracking you, waiting for his moment." A cold chill crept down my spine. I thought back to all the faces I'd seen at rest stops and truck stops over the past few weeks. None of them stood out, but now, every one of them seemed suspicious. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I tried," he said, "but you kept running. I had no way to reach you." Before I could ask anything else, the sound of a truck engine rumbled in the distance. I turned, and a rig pulled into the rest area. My blood ran cold. There was something familiar about the truck, and a creeping realization dawned on me. It was him. The investigator's face went pale. "Get back in your truck," he whispered urgently. Now. I didn't waste a second. I jumped back into my cab, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands shook as I started the engine, my eyes glued to the mirror. The other truck had stopped, its headlights glaring at me like a predator waiting to pounce. I floored the gas, my tires screeching as I sped out of the rest area. I didn't look back. I never saw the investigator again. I don't know who the trucker was, but every night since, I check my mirrors, terrified that the Seaton, or worse, the killer, will appear again. Some roads are darker than they seem, and I'm not sure I'll ever escape this one.